Fascism is a reaction to communism. The 20th century is littered with examples of attempts to create communist societies, though ended up becoming fascistic. Communists often use this point to claim that communism has never failed due to its own ideological flaws, but due to fascists destroying their utopian vision. In reality, this is merely a deflection, since fascism is always a reaction to the threat of communism. Until people accept and understand this point, we will forever be stuck on the pendulum of communism swinging to fascism. This video is therefore an extremely important topic, given that communists are constantly blaming their own failures on fascism, as though the two ideologies do not feed off each other in many ways. To understand why communism leads to fascism, we can actually start by looking even further into the past than the 20th century, where communism and fascism came about. By examining the French Revolution of the 18th century, we can see that even this far back, and before communism came about, it was becoming clear that collectivist philosophy leads to nationalist dictatorship. Unlike the American Revolution, heavily based on the unalienable individualist principles of John Locke, the French Revolution was heavily influenced by collectivist philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau. While Locke believed that individuals had natural rights that should never be infringed upon, Rousseau believed that individuals should be forced to obey the will of the collective, or what he called popular sovereignty. He also believed that people should subordinate themselves to the citizenry acting as a collective. This perspective had a disastrous influence on the French Revolution. For the first time in the Enlightenment era, the brutality of positive liberty manifested, where any goal was acceptable if it brought people closer to a brave new world. All individuals subordinate to the will of the collective, if required. The French Revolution led to an infamous event in history known as the Reign of Terror, where thousands upon thousands were executed via the guillotine, and thousands more were killed on the spot in summary executions with no trial. Historical accounts tell of blood running through the streets from the sheer level of death, day in, day out. As was the pattern in the 20th century, this horrendous tyranny terrified and exhausted people to such an extent that a military strongman would emerge to take charge, promising to create order and pride in national identity. In the aftermath of the French Revolution, this was none other than Napoleon Bonaparte, the first fascist dictator of the modern era. While Napoleon was a brilliant military and political strategist, he was also a megalomaniac who became the Emperor of France and repeatedly tried to conquer the whole of Europe. Only after the Battle of Waterloo was he finally stopped, though millions would die in the process. While it's true that the French Revolution was not communist, especially considering that Karl Marx had not even been born yet, and Napoleon was in power long before fascism became a recognised ideology, the event was still the first clue that collectivist philosophy would always lead to a fascist conclusion. The Russian Revolution of 1917, over 100 years after the French Revolution occurred, was an even greater disaster than the French one. Mere months after the Russian Revolution, civil war broke out between the Red Army, led by Vladimir Lenin, and the Bolsheviks, against the White Army, made up of army officers, Cossacks, and other Russian nationalists. This pattern of nationalism fighting against the internationalism of Marxist communism would occur again and again in the 20th century. Whether it was the Chinese Civil War, the Spanish Civil War, or the Korean War, the same sides would oppose one another, both advocating positive liberty, where anything was permissible if it achieved a desired result. What also made the Russian Revolution very similar to the French Revolution was the terror tactics employed to terrify the masses and purge the population of thousands deemed unfit for the new society. While the French Revolution led to the Reign of Terror, the Russian Revolution led to the Red Terror, where people were brutally tortured and murdered for being landowners and business owners, or what Marxists refer to as the bourgeoisie. Every communist revolution leads to this purging and repression of the population, since only after this takes place do Marxist collectivists believe they can get closer to their utopia. It was this repression that initially caused the Russian Civil War, though once the Marxist-Leninists defeated the nationalists, even greater repression ensued. Like the French Revolution, a strong man eventually took power. This was none other than the tyrant Joseph Stalin, a man merging fascistic values with communist ideology. It would be impossible to know exactly how many Stalin murdered, given that countless people were erased from public records. However, while it is conservatively believed Lenin killed around 3 million, it is conservatively believed that Stalin killed around 30 million. The threat Stalin and communism represented was so terrifying to countries surrounding Russia that it contributed to the rise of fascism in Germany and helped Hitler emerge as yet another strongman in history. Hitler tried to emulate Soviet ideology in his early rise to power, though the anti-communist sentiment was so strong that Hitler subtly moulded it to suit fascism instead. This is very easy to see in early propaganda posters. Many socialists and communists try their hardest to revise this subtle respect that communist and fascist ideologues had for one another in the past, even to this day. But it's impossible to deny when we consider that World War II was started with both the Soviets and Germans invading Poland together. As contradictory as it sounds for fascists and communists to work together, considering they fought against each other so many times in the past, it's very clear that above all, both ideologies are socialists and collectivists and will make uneasy pacts with one another if it results in yet more collectivist domination. North Korea has become the latest in a long line of attempts by communists and other international socialists to deny that fascism is often a reaction to communism. North Korea has gradually become a very isolated and destitute country after once more attempting to create a utopia based on collective control of property rights. As usual, this has been an utter failure, and while countries that used to be communist, like China, have liberalized their economies for the better, raising the standard of living for the average Chinese person, North Korea has resisted such change, finding itself increasingly isolated and alone. What this has resulted in is, yes, you guessed it, the rise of fascistic sentiment in North Korea, a country relying on jingoistic propaganda against outsiders, blaming them for any problems that arise. North Korea is increasingly disassociating itself with the Marxist ideology that led to its demise, and this is the excuse that international socialists use to claim once again that all totalitarian regimes are actually fascist. Of course, the socialist and collectivist link to fascism is also denied. International socialists spreading lies about fascism being a capitalist ideology. In Europe, we can see that the international socialist experiment, that is the European Union, increasingly alienating anyone taking pride in national identity, is also resulting in the rise of fascism. Whether it's the British National Party and English Defence League in the UK, or the Golden Dawn in Greece, we can see yet again that moving toward communism leads to a fascist reaction. The reason for this is simple. When biological identity is threatened by an ideology that rejects biological identity, an authoritarian version of biological identity begins to push back. This is why fascism will never be far behind when communism and collectivism ensues. This is Rocking Mr. E, over and out.